part of the Earglue Media family of podcasts.
You're listening to Petticoats and Poppies.
History Girls at the Movies.
Welcome to Petticoats and Poppies, History Girls at the Movies. We're your hosts, Maggie and
Nicole. For this episode, we're discussing a new film from one of our favorite production and distribution companies, Focus Features. Not only is this our 40th episode, but it's also our 2-year anniversary of the podcast. So it felt right to talk about this film because we talked about a Focus Features film starring Johnny Flynn on our very first episode. And today we're back to talk about another one.
yes, and we are back to talk about a very excellent one. It is called The Outfit. It premieres March 18th. It is a crime drama directed by Graham Moore in his directorial debut. The screenplay is also by Moore, as well as Jonathan McLean, and it stars Mark Rylance, Zoey Deutch, Johnny Flynn, Dylan O'Brien, Nikki Amuka Bird, Simon Russell Beale. The score is by Alexandra Desplat, and it is a film about an English tailor in Chicago whose main customers are a family of gangsters, and it takes place in Chicago in 1956.
So I've got to say, I have this thing where, like, the moment I see that Focus Features logo, I get excited. It's like a Pavlovian response at this point, I think.
Same.
Like, I'm like salivating the moment I see the Focus Features logo. Like, I feel like a lot of film people, they're like obsessed with like A24 or Neon or something like that. Focus Features are like my version of that.
Yeah,
Like,
same. Honestly, same.
I love them. And I feel like I feel like the fact that we have this podcast really says it all. Like, we are Focus Features girls.
We are. Focus Features sponsor us.
Like, I mean, literally. I also love Johnny Flynn. I listen to his music all the time. So I get really excited to see him in movies after hearing his voice a lot. And I really enjoyed this movie. I love the opening segment with like this narration that Mark Rylance is doing. Mark Rylance, another actor that I love, of him talking about like the importance of clothing as he's working in his shop, and like, you know, how much you can tell about people from clothing and stuff like that. Every time that they have a scene of like Mark Rylance just doing his little like tailor thing, working on the clothes, I thought that was really like hypnotizing. I love one location films. I think they're really fun. I love that most of this movie takes place over the course of one night. That's something that I really enjoy, and obviously something that's been easier to make with COVID restrictions and stuff. I don't know exactly when this filmed, but I would assume it was just at some point during COVID.
Yes.
And I thought that the way that they built the relationships in this film was really great, particularly the relationship between Dylan O'Brien and Johnny Flynn's characters, but then also the relationship between Zoey Deutch and Mark Rylance's characters. I really enjoyed that, and the way that they sort of revealed more and more about these characters as the film went on. I thought all the performances were like across the board great.
Mhm.
I do think maybe they take like one twist too many at the end. I think that for the most part, all these like different twists and turns are really great. They do it really well. They build tension really nicely. But I do think like the very end bit, I was like, okay, no, like, we're done. We're done. Like, there's that moment, and I feel like you probably know what I'm talking about, where like you think the movie's like over, and then they're
Mhm.
like, psych. And I was like, no, I was good actually. Like, but I think that they like up until that point, they do a really fantastic job of like not letting it feel like they're just having plot twists for the sake of having plot twists.
Mhm.
They do a really good job of making it all feel very like purposeful, which I appreciate in a film like this.
Yes, I definitely agree. So like you, I have that Pavlovian response to Focus Features. Focus
Yeah.
Features never misses. This may come as a surprise to our listeners, but like I'm a really big fan of Dylan. Like I never actually watched Teen Wolf, but for some reason I would just see him on my Tumblr feed all the
Oh yeah.
time. And I would end up like watching random videos like about his character and like interviews that he did. And I just like became a fan of his, even though I wasn't actually watching his work. So I remember actually being like initially really excited when I saw that he was going to be in a historical film. I actually
Yeah.
edited over at Collider. I edited a couple of different articles about it, like when the trailer dropped, when pictures dropped, stuff like that. And I was like, oh my god, this is like right up my alley because it's like Johnny Flynn and Dylan. And I was just
This
like, this
is
is great.
such a Petticoats and Poppies film.
Exactly. I was like,
Like,
this movie was literally made for us. Like, I
yes,
am convinced.
we are the
Um,
target audience.
we are. And it was like perfectly timed as well because then Dylan was in the Taylor Swift music video. And like, I also have a
Yep.
podcast about Taylor Swift and like freaked out about the All Too Well 10-minute version, music video.
Yep.
So I'm a huge fan of his. Absolutely loved him in this movie. I will say, like, accents were kind of an issue in this movie, but
Shaky.
they
Little
were
shaky.
shaky. I kind of feel like Hollywood, just based off of the last couple of movies and television shows I've seen, I feel like they have fired all of their accent coaches and just replaced them with like COVID teams because accents have
All
been
of the
all
all
over
of
their
the
place.
accent teams have been just working on Pam and Tommy or something. I don't know.
Honestly, like, I would love to know what happened to them. I appreciate the effort. I think everyone did a pretty valiant attempt. Also really appreciate that Dylan just abandons it, like, halfway through. He starts really strong, and honestly, like, I say this as an actor who was in a project where they told me I needed to do a New York accent on the spot, and I did 2 scenes with a New York accent and then abandoned it and gave
Yep.
them other takes. And for some reason, they decided to take the takes where I had the New York accent and then mix them with the ones when I no longer have a New York accent. Um,
To be fair, I will say Johnny Flynn does a decent job.
he's very North American.
Yes, considering the fact that, like,
He's British.
he's British. So, like, for a British person, he's doing decent. Like, I feel like I have more beef with Dylan O'Brien because I'm like, you should know more about regional
Yes.
dialects in the US.
And then he just abandons it, and it's like, yeah, this works for me. And I
Yep.
appreciate that. I appreciate an actor that's like, you know what? Maybe I gave some scenes where I had an accent. Now I don't. We're just gonna roll with it. So as an actor who has also done that, I respect the
Yeah.
commitment. Literally no fault of his.
Yep.
An attempt was made. But that was really like my only actual complaint with the movie. I'll talk about like one super, 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 super minor, very much in the weeds complaint when we get to costumes. But I just really enjoyed this movie. I went to the screening with my mom, who is a bigger Johnny Flynn fan than you.
Oh my
Um,
god.
like she has been obsessed with him since we saw Emma. He also does music for a history show that my mom watches, which makes her very
Oh,
excited because
yeah.
it makes her think that he might be interested in history. So that if they ever met, they would have something to talk about, which I think is
I
just very
love
endearing.
that.
So when the thing happens to Johnny Flynn's character, and I could see it coming from a mile away because you just don't have those big scissors and not use them on somebody, I was like
Yep.
watching my mom out of the corner of my eye, like preparing for her to watch her beloved get killed. Um, but I thought it was so good, and I also I loved that he was bad. I feel like he has here recently. I know you haven't seen The Score yet, which screened last year at TIFF,
Yeah.
which is an excellent film that Johnny Flynn is in. I don't think they've gotten distribution dates for the US yet,
Oh,
but he
man.
plays a bad guy in that as well. So I'm like, can we stop typecasting Johnny Flynn as bad guys and go back to the part where he's the Jane Austen romantic
Please.
lead, like
Please.
Bridgerton season 3, maybe?
Oh my god. Stop. Don't even put that thought in my head.
I'm gonna put that out. I've been having really good luck with making things happen, so I'm just gonna put that out there. Johnny Flynn, season 3, season 4, Bridgerton. Just think he'd be really great. Don't know what role he would play, but he looks pretty in period costumes, and this is a historical podcast. But yeah, I agree with you in terms of one location movies. I'm a big fan of them as well. I felt like this could very easily be adapted to the stage, and I think it should be. I think this would be a
Mm.
very fantastic stage production. And I also just felt like the cinematographer, Dick Pope, just did so well with keeping things really fresh because I think oftentimes single location movies, and particularly ones that use a single location and then stay in one room for most of the movie, can feel very stale. and things can get very
Yeah.
stagnant because there's really only so many places that you can shoot from, and you don't want to cross those certain lines because then it takes you out of the moment. And the way that they constructed this film to feel so very active, the camera felt very active. It wasn't passive. It led you to conclusions. It led you to feel things. It motivated the story as much as the performances did. And I think for that, like, good on you, Dick Pope. You're a great cinematographer. It really worked for this. There was one thing, and maybe you noticed it too, that I thought was interesting. They really overplayed the blood dripping out of the trunk.
Okay, I was waiting the whole time then for, like, somebody to notice the blood and that to be, like, how they got, like, given away,
But
like,
nobody ever did.
so, like, why do we keep seeing it if it wasn't gonna, like, play a role in it?
I was
Like,
like, did anybody ever notice it? It never affected anybody except the audience, which I guess maybe that was them trying to make us feel like we were an active part of this and
but
like
also, like,
increasing our anxiety. But it felt like, oh my God, what is it? A MacGuffin. Like the thing that keep or
it
no,
like
that was a red herring. The tape with the MacGuffin. I thought it was really interesting that it utilized these things that people were always like, don't do that in your shows anymore. But it worked. But it also stressed
yep.
me out.
It felt like the blood dripping was, like, Chekhov's smoking gun or whatever, but
Yeah.
then, like, we never came back around to it.
Also,
Like,
it very much, and I talk about this in my review that will, by the time this podcast is up, already be up over
mhm.
at Collider, but I talked about how that very much felt like The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe, like
Yep.
the beating of the
Yep.
heart, the dripping of the blood. But I felt like the payoff could have been a little bit better if he had noticed the blood dripping because nobody noticed. Like if Leonard had just like looked and seen it, maybe
Yep.
that would have worked, but I felt like that maybe got cut somewhere
Yeah.
along the way, like a scene didn't
Yeah.
work and they just moved on from it. But that one
Yeah.
was I was like, "What is going on here? Something's happening, but it's not."
Right?
But yeah, as somebody who actually doesn't like mystery movies, all that much, I actually
Mhm.
really enjoyed this. My mother, who has probably read more history books than like or not history books, but mystery books, history and mystery books, more mystery books than like anybody, um, she loved it. She was like, "I would see this again." So, she actually called this a better detective movie than Batman.
Okay, okay. I mean, to be fair, like, I do think it's a better detective movie than
Exactly.
Batman.
Yes.
Like, I will give it that. Like,
She was not wrong. Did I want to disagree with her? Yes. Was she
right,
right?
like, my
Also,
instinct
yes.
just then was, like, to disagree, and then I was like, "Well, actually." Like,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
So first, I'm just going to give a little bit of info on Chicago in the 1950s. I was very interested, even though we don't really like see much of Chicago. Chicago's a place I've been visiting since I was very young. We used to go yearly up until COVID happened because my dad's family is from Chicago, and most of my dad's family still lives in Chicago. So I thought I would dive a little bit into the history of the city. It was in the 50s the second most populated city in the US. Although in the 50s and 60s, the population of Chicago did shrink for the first time because people were moving out to the suburbs out of the city, as you know, industrialization was sort of continuing, and as you had that sort of flight to the suburbs following World War II. A lot of There was a lot of building of public housing at this time and like neighborhoods torn down to make public housing, although it really didn't combat the issues of poverty and violence that it was meant to help with. This was also an incredibly creative period for the city, though, particularly with blues and jazz artists. Chess Records opened in 1950, and the South Side, or Bronzeville as it was known, was this small but very booming community for African Americans at the time. Uh, I thought it was interesting in 1955, WTTV's first broadcast aired. So it was a time when Chicago was sort of developing and stuff. But in studying Chicago in the 1950s, I came across two interesting stories, both of which have elements from this film. The first one is, since fire does play a role in this movie, the Our Lady of Angels school fire happened on December 1st of 1958. It was an elementary school in Chicago, a Catholic elementary school that had about 1,600 students, and a fire broke out right before the end of school in the basement of the building. And 92 students and 3 nuns died in the fire, but a lot more people were injured because they were jumping out of the higher windows to try and escape it because Obviously, it was burning upwards from the basement. It made international headlines, obviously in the US, Canada, across Europe. And it actually led to a lot of improvements in fire safety codes in schools because people were um, really sort of freaked out by this fire. And obviously, fire is something that we see a lot of in the outfit. Uh, the other thing, and this I had to stop myself from putting too much in the notes because there's so much to this case. And if you're interested at all in unsolved crimes, definitely go look it up. I had to like stop myself at a certain point because I was like, I need to be able to sleep tonight. But the murder of the Grimes sisters, obviously, like murder plays a role in the film, so I thought this was kind of related. It is still unsolved. It is a murder that happened. Well, so these two girls went missing on December 28th of 1956. They were named Barbara and Patricia Grimes. They were 15 and 12 years old at the time. They had been at the movie theater seeing the Elvis Presley movie Love Me Tender. They were huge Elvis Presley fans. And they never came home from the theater that night. And it was like one of the largest missing persons investigations in Chicago's history. And they were like massive Elvis fans, like I said. So he actually on like the radio asked them to return home if they had run away, because at first a lot of people were like, oh, they just ran away from home. But then it sort of was, there were all these supposed sightings of them. Over like the next month, but a lot of them weren't confirmed and some of them were like later denied, and they found their bodies uh at the end of January. I think it was like January 22nd, 1957. They were completely unclothed but very clean, and there had like different autopsies done on them, and there was a lot of disagreement. And also the police chief, I think it was, did not agree with some of the things that the autopsy reports said. And he had seen the bodies too, obviously. So there's still like a lot of weird questions around it. The autopsy reports said that they had probably died within like 5 hours of when they had last been seen. But then another report said that because of how there was frost on their bodies, um, that like couldn't be true. They couldn't have died before like a certain day in January. Um, the official cause of death listed was secondary shock due to low temperature exposure, but there were also bruises and potentially ice pick wounds on them. So some people disagreed. There was also this thing about like they believed that some of the markings on the bodies had actually been caused by rats, um, which would indicate that the bodies had been, somewhere for some time, that rats have been able to get to them. Yeah, so it's still this like huge mystery. It is one of the most famous Chicago cold cases. And probably was not related to any sort of mobs organized crime, but it is one of the sort of most famous Chicago crime cases that has never been solved. And I do know that like one of their brothers was still alive, at least I think back in like the earlier 2000s, and had said that like he would be thrilled if anyone could ever figure it out, because the family was pretty traumatized by it. There's also all sorts of stuff about whether or not they've been sexually assaulted, and how the police kind of tried to hush it up though because they like didn't want it to look bad for the family.
How old were they? They were like
15
12
and 12.
Yeah, like 12 and 15. Super young.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really horrific case, honestly, but also like very fascinating just in that there's so many different theories and so many conflicting pieces of information about it. It it's sort of wild. Yeah, but so that's what was going on in Chicago in the 50s. So
And
obviously a place with a lot of crime. And I think it's interesting too, just in that like Chicago as a city, I feel like is associated with a lot of crime happening. Um, for obvious reasons. Like it is a major city that doesn't really have as much how do I say this? It doesn't have like the reputation that New York City has or LA has in terms of sort of other things to identify it by. So I think it sort of gets hit with like some of the just more generic like city stereotypes. So I think it's a really interesting choice that they set this film in Chicago.
Yes. So speaking of crime, I feel like I would be remiss not to talk about the actual outfit, considering that this film's title is a fun little play on not only the garment, but the criminal group that is notorious in Chicago. And while Al Capone may not make an appearance in the outfit, considering he was 10 years in the grave by the time that this film is set. He is name dropped a handful of times, as one would expect for a movie loosely based on the Chicago outfit. So the outfit is set in the 1950s, but the criminal outfit started 4 decades prior to that and is still in operation today. You may recognize it by its more commonly referred to name of the Chicago Mafia. So the
Okay.
outfit, yes, yeah, still active, still very much a thing that is going on. There's things I can't talk about on air. Just popped into my mind. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
still very much active. So the outfit was founded in the 19 teens by Big Jim Colosimo, but the outfit really fully rose to power in the early 1920s under the leadership of Johnny Torrio and then Al Capone. The main conflict between the rival family gangs was about alcohol distribution because this was right in the midst of the prohibition. And then it can kind of continue to spiral and snowball. And it got into a lot of just kind of like turf wars, political moves, infiltrating the police. Then there was the whole FBI stuff, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. Just a lot of stuff. There was racketeering, there was illegal importing, lots of nonsense was going on, and it's still going on today. So the main rivalry was between the Italians, the Irish, and then the North Side gang. But I feel like I need to start at the beginning with Kalisimo. So Kalisimo hailed from Italy. He immigrated in 1895 and very quickly began establishing himself as a criminal. Like as soon as his feet stepped down in Chicago, he was like making a name for himself. He brought in Torrio, who was already an established New York gangster. I believe they had business dealings, and then he was like, "Hey, you're good. Come work for me. Come join the family." So Torrio moves from New York to Chicago in 1919, which is when he is invited to join the outfit. In 1920, Torrio calls Kalisimo and informs him that there is a delivery being brought to the Kalisimo's restaurant. When Kalisimo arrives, he is ambushed and killed. Very traumatic experience. He had been married 3 weeks prior to his second wife. He had allegedly called his wife and said, "Angel, just got a call, got to meet a guy at the restaurant. It's important." And then he was dead. After Kalisimo's death, the outfit really took off, but first, Torrio seized control. He organized a very extravagant funeral for his dead boss that would serve as the template for all future over-the-top, flowery send-offs for mobsters in the 1920s into the 1930s. It is largely believed that Torrio is the one who orchestrated Kalisimo's death, that he wanted his power hold, didn't think Kalisimo was doing a good job, so he decided to take over. The story goes that the hit was placed on Kalisimo by the New York gangster Frankie Yale, who Torrio had worked with in New York. And so there was really no real reason for Yale to have beef with Kalisimo. What people think is that because he was just far enough removed that Torrio called in a favor and said, "I need this guy taken care of, make it look like you're involved, don't make me look like I'm involved." And it worked, though everybody kind of just knew, these things do happen when you're dealing with male egos. So basically, Al Capone is arguably the most famous Chicago gangster. And of course, that is because he is known as Scarface. You may or may not have seen a movie or two about this. Very well known fellow. He was born in 1899 in New York City. He was the son of Italian immigrants. He was a member of the Five Points gang as a teenager, and he worked as a bouncer at brothels. This is a very important piece of information. Hold on to that for the future. He worked for Torrio as well when he was in New York, and then Torrio brought him to Chicago to act as his personal bodyguard. After a failed assassination attempt in 1925, Torrio was like, I've kind of had enough of this. Like, this has been a good 5 years. This has been fun. I'm tired. I don't want to get killed. He gets shot. He survives. He's like, I'm not into this anymore. This 26-year-old kid that's kind of my protege, I'm just going to hand the outfit over to him and see how this works. I'm reclusing myself from this. And it worked. Al Capone took over, led the outfit through a lot of murder and mayhem. You know, there's some other movies you can watch if you're really interested in what Scarface was up to. Ultimately, despite all of his political meddling, his very well-known hits on people, lots of murder, the big murder that he's really known for, the big massacre, that whole thing, it was tax evasion that they finally got him on, which is, of course, kind of the most popular way to get these big mob boss guys to think that they can do whatever they want, because it's kind of the most concrete, credible thing that you can link them to. So he gets convicted of tax evasion in 1931. He is one of the longer running leaders of the outfit. You know, he didn't get taken out by an assassination or an attempt, though there were many attempts on his life as well. So he gets sent to Alcatraz. That's a whole thing. He ends up getting out of Alcatraz. He's very sick at this point because he has syphilis, which he got as a teenager. Was never treated, and it progressed to a much more aggressive form of syphilis, which starts to attack the brain. He is taken to one hospital that refuses to treat him because he is Al Capone. We're not going to save his life. There's an oath you take. You're supposed to treat anybody. But he does end up getting transferred to another hospital that treats him with a lot of respect. He ends up leaving them money in his will because they treated him so well. He bought them trees to put up that still stand today, like the whole thing. But he was too far gone. At that point, the syphilis had attacked his brain so severely that psychiatrist said that he had kind of retained the mental state of that of a 12-year-old. It attacked him quite severely. He was among some of the first patients to receive penicillin as a treatment, which I thought was interesting. It, of course, did not treat it. It was too far gone. Basically, there was nothing that could be done. He ended up contracting pneumonia, and that's what ultimately killed him at the age of 48. And, like, it's hard because, like, Al Capone is, like, a terrible person and did terrible things and orchestrated a lot of death. But there is still some part of me, like, as a good person who's like, that's a terrible way to go. To have, like, something that you did as a teenager, like, have such a, like, and it's such a funny, it's that moral dilemma. Like, do you want to save a bad person who's, like, responsible for a lot of death?
It just also feels like such a weird way for a man like that to go. Like, it's not what you would. It's certainly not what he expected for himself.
No.
Like,
and just
yeah,
reading some of the stuff about how poorly he was treated in the hospital, and, like, knowing that, like, hospitals are supposed to treat anybody, and, like, I don't know, it struck some weird sympathetic chord in me, and I'm like, why am I feeling sympathy?
It's so weird, but it is such a clear breaking of the, what is it, the Socratic oath that doctors take, like,
yeah,
which I just, anytime that's broken, it, like, makes me uneasy. So
same. And I think that's where I was like, and it's sad too, because, like, I always feel bad for people who, like, things that attack their brain, because I think that, like, that scares me the most. I think that's, like, a fear of mine. So, like, when I was reading through, for some reason, I did not know that that was what killed Al Capone. I literally just assumed that he got pneumonia from being in prison.
Yeah.
Because I'd always heard he died from pneumonia, and then when I read about, like, all of the actual medical stuff that was going on that led to the pneumonia, I was like, "That's terrible." Like, terrible guy, not sorry that he's dead, but sorry that that was the death that he ended up with, which is, there's some irony in that too.
I hate to hear anyone going through that kind of shit, for one thing, because it means that, like, it exists.
I know.
Like,
I honestly, like, I know so little about syphilis outside of, like, stuff that happened in the Civil War. Like, I know a lot about syphilis taking out soldiers. But I did not know that syphilis attacked the brain. And I did not know that there was a further, and now I'm like, that's terrifying. Like, how many people did this happen to?
I was already, like, weirdly afraid of syphilis, which,
I'm
like, is
afraid of
not really
syphilis too.
like, I literally have no reason to be afraid of syphilis.
Like, I'm never gonna get syphilis, but this terrifies me.
Yeah, same. I'm like, "Oh my god." I'm like, "What if that happens to me?" Like, it's not gonna happen to me, but okay.
Clearly, we worked at a brothel in our past life, and, like, we're just afraid of that happening again.
Maybe. Like, yeah, maybe that's why, like, anytime I hear the word, I'm like, "Whoo."
Right.
Like,
It may also because of Les Mis as well, like, the clap is mentioned, which is
it's true, it's true. Maybe
it's
it's
Les
just, like,
Mis.
too much history too early.
Too much history too
Like,
early, yes.
yeah.
Speaking of history and fun things, when I was researching the outfit, I came across, I don't know, I don't know how much credibility there is in this rumor, historical speculation theory. So I'm giving that a good warning before I delve into this because it is kind of an insane theory. But I do love history mysteries and weird stuff that like there are conclusions that could be drawn from these things. So and there is like secondary accounts from people who were in the outfit like on trial that like backed up some of these facts. Anyways, the Chicago outfit may have gotten JFK elected to president. Um Yeah. So a lot of people argue about like the credibility of this rumor. Obviously, it's hard to take mafia men at face value, even when they are sitting on trial. But there are a lot of people who have claimed that Kennedy's father met with the outfit boss at the time, who was Sam Giancana. I think that's how you say it. Right before the election, they had dinner in Chicago, and they allegedly, I really do not want to be taken out. They allegedly, um, struck up a deal that if JFK was elected, he would lay off, um, cracking down on organized crime, which the president at the time, the incumbent president was doing. And so they were looking for a way to avoid that. And, you know, good Catholics help each other out, even if it's an Irish president. You know, we're still gonna give him some assistance. And certain versions of the story say that because JFK walked back on this alleged deal that his father made and that they did crack down on organized crime, that it's possible that the outfit was responsible for assassinating him and Robert Kennedy.
Oh my
Uh,
god.
and that it's less of a Kennedy curse and more of a you cross the outfit and now your entire family will die in mysterious ways. Um,
I'm shook.
yeah, and like there's I was trying like you not to go down the rabbit hole because like the woman that Robert Kennedy was with the day that the car crash happened has ties to the outfit. And yeah, it's a whole thing,
Ah!
and, like, I did not have time to, like, double check and cross my T's and dot my I's,
Well, also with things like that, like, how would you
but, there's people that apparently, like, on their deathbeds, guys who worked for the outfit, like, told their families this, and, like, people who have said that the assassin was hired by the outfit, and, like, people who were on trial because there was like a big trial in the early 2000s and like all of the paperwork has not been released yet and there's a lot of heavily redacted stuff. There was a big like families ratting each other out in 2007 and like the outfit went on trial before the federal courts. I don't remember this happening. Apparently it was a big media thing. I was like, this happened in 2007?
I
I
don't remember
guess
that, but I would have been in 7th grade, so I guess I wouldn't remember that,
Yeah,
like
like, I did not know this was a thing, but everything's still very heavily redacted because like, the time has not elapsed enough, and then, like, some other, like, geopolitical crises were going on at the same time, and it kinda got lost in the wash, but, like, allegedly, there could be stuff in these documents from this court case because, like, people talked because they didn't wanna go to jail, and obviously, like, the government's not going to ever give out facts that, like, a president took bribes in the mafia, even if he's dead. But I think it's interesting because, like, personally, I've always been really fascinated by the Kennedy curse. And the idea that the Kennedy curse could be less of a curse and more of a
Yeah.
mafia dealing just really it tickled some some part of my brain. So I'm gonna have to like dive into this. And I just wanted to share it because I thought that was like just too cool not to talk about. But also caging it in the fact that this is genuinely just speculation. But there are books that people have published with a lot of conjecture and anecdotal and sourced materials. So it's definitely something to explore if you think that is compelling enough.
I'm gonna be like thinking about that like in the shower from now
Right?
on. Wow, okay. Well, to go along with that, I decided to look a bit into the history of the FBI. The FBI do play a role in the film. So, and I learned a lot of things in researching this that I did not know. Technically, the FBI says that it was founded on July 26th of 1908. Uh, at that time, U.S. Attorney General Charles Bonaparte, and yes, he is a relation of that Bonaparte, created this group of federal investigators who reported to the chief examiner Stanley W. Finch in the Department of Justice. And 9 or 10, depending on who you believe, of these men were former Secret Service employees. A year later, it was renamed the Bureau of Investigation, and then in 1935, it officially gains the name of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, as it is still known today. Before 1908, the Department of Justice would just like hire a private investigator as needed or rent them out from other agencies. So they would just basically like borrow Secret Servicemen sometimes. And then finally, some people in the government were like, well, that shouldn't be a thing. And they ended up just forming their own like bureau to be able to do things themselves. But it was originally used to investigate criminals who went over state lines, and then during World War I to investigate people dodging the draft, people violating the Espionage Act, and immigrants who were suspected of, in some way aiding the enemy. That was at the time mostly German immigrants. Then J. Edgar Hoover gets involved. And there's a Red Scare from like 1919 to 1920. They're sort of trying to root out any radicals. At that time, they're very focused on like anarchists. And in 1924, J. Edgar Hoover becomes the acting director of the Bureau of Investigation. Hoover transforms this. He creates this like national fingerprint file. They have a crime lab. They start a training school for agents. And the 1930s are this time where there's a lot of organized crime and a lot of criminals, like partially brought on by prohibition. And the FBI helps bring a lot of them down, like George Machine Gun Kelly, John Dillinger, and the prevalence of these criminals is part of like why the FBI actually becomes more of like a major big deal federal agency. And what I know of the FBI really came from the research that I've done on Bonnie and Clyde, because part of how they got away with what they did for so long was because they would just cross state lines. And at the time, there wasn't really a force that could, like, go to Texas or to wherever they were and sort of sort all of that out. In any case, in the 1930s, the FBI becomes like very beloved by the American people. The American people think that they're great. They're solving all these crimes. They're taking down these like big name criminals. So they're like, it's kind of big, flashy news. And then during World War II, Hoover focuses on the communist threat. And then later, he works with Joseph McCarthy to launch the second Red Scare. In 1950, the FBI also launches their 10 Most Wanted Fugitives program, which is basically a way that they will. It reminds me of, I never had MySpace, but you know how on MySpace you would have, what was it, your like top 8 friends or whatever? It's like that, but it's the FBI's most wanted list, and people would get, like, really excited whenever it, like, changed,
Love that so much.
which is, like, such a weird concept to me in some ways, because as I said, it feels like a MySpace top 8 list, and
That you
this
didn't want to be on.
Right, exactly. I mean, or I guess maybe you did, I don't know. It depends on what kind of criminal you were.
If you're in
In
it
nine
for the fame or if you're in it for the
Literally,
game.
there it is. In 1950, Hoover also launches the Sex Deviance program, which was basically to try and get rid of all gay people within government positions. Most of the documents relating to this program were destroyed in the 1970s.
Can't imagine why.
Right, like, I wonder why they would do that. So there's a,
That's
like,
suspicious.
literally, that's odd. Um, and I also thought it was noteworthy. I don't know, just because I feel like these are names that people recognize. In 1951 is when Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were tried for espionage. In 1953, the Top Hoodlum program was created, which is quite a name, in response to organized crime. And they basically gathered information about mobsters and tried to crack down on them. But there was a little bit of like issue in terms of they did this by infiltrating like mob groups.
Mhm.
And there's all these different examples of times when they like let things happen because to stop them would have made their like FBI informant too vulnerable. And so they sort of later came under fire for like the amount of things that they like knew about beforehand and just like didn't stop. Um which is interesting. I'm also trying not to like make too many claims about the FBI right now. Uh, this is the podcast that gets us like put onto too many bad lists. In 1956, the year that this film takes place, Hoover started COINTELPRO, which is the program that mostly just targeted the US Communist Party. But they later used it to infiltrate a lot of radical groups. In the 1960s, it was used both on the KKK and on a bunch of different civil rights groups.
Interesting.
Uh-huh. And it's through that Martin Luther King Jr. was continually targeted by the FBI and pretty continually harassed and had his phone line tapped and all that kind of stuff. The conspiracy theory is sitting there. I don't need to say it. Uh,
You set it up.
uh,
They can figure it out.
yeah, is it a conspiracy theory? I don't know. By
Hey, I'm just
1970.
saying, Judas and the Black Messiah makes it very clear it's not a conspiracy theory.
Mhm, mhm. So by 1970, people were rightfully suspicious of the FBI.
Can't imagine
Um,
why.
yeah, right. Hoover conveniently and that's like I don't mean like I think something happened. Like it just was kind of lucky for him. Conveniently dies in 1972, right before Watergate. Watergate reveals that the FBI, had protected Nixon and they were put under investigation. And basically, they found out all these things about mispractice, let's call it, within the FBI. And ever since then, the media's been like a lot more intent upon like monitoring the FBI as sort of a, some sort of way to relegate them. Um, And I will say, in doing my research for this, if you go to the official FBI website, the history page on there is interesting. The language that they're using, I would love to know when it was last updated. They really should hire an intern to update it
Interesting.
because yeah, it's a time. I would recommend like looking at it because I was like, is that how you're gonna describe that? All right, that's cool. We
Interesting.
love some government propaganda. Um,
Oh, yeah. Such a big
yeah,
fan.
yeah, same. So yeah, that's I'm not gonna go into more recent FBI dealings because that's for a different podcast, frankly.
And that's for
Um,
us getting taken off the air.
yeah, exactly. So I'm gonna let that sit. But basically what you need to know is that like FBI started well, it started just because like they were like, oh wait, maybe we should have our own people. Um and then mostly fought like, you know, organized crime and like big name criminals until they realized that they could use it to just sort of, go on witch hunts. Love that. Yeah.
Big
So,
fan of that.
mhm, mhm.
As somebody who is currently dealing with the FBI, I want to say they're pretty good on some things.
Yeah.
Internet crime, they're very good with dealing with. But that's all I can say about that.
Yeah.
On a completely different topic, but one that is also very so relevant, about a movie about a suit maker. Totally failing to remember what he says. A cutter. He's a cutter. Totally blanked on that word. But the costumes in this film are great. I think the suits are fantastic. I really loved some of the fun little details, like when he sewed the tape into the jacket. I thought that was ingenious. My heart broke a little bit when he got the blood on the jacket after all of that work, knowing how much work and like the labor of love that goes into making suit jackets. Um, I will say though, this is something that my mother and I both like rolled our eyes at the beginning of the movie when he's narrating his um, suit making process. He cuts the paper pattern with his shears that he cuts fabric with, which any costumer, any cutter, any seamstress, any clothing maker knows you do not do.
You do not do. Mm-mm.
Cutting paper dulls your scissors and you will not be able to get a clean cut on your fabric. So I literally like just grimaced when that happened, and then loved being able to have the same conversation with my mom, who was like, "What are you doing?" I will forgive it, but that was actually a bigger issue than the accents for me as somebody who has been yelled at my entire life for not using sewing scissors on
I
paper.
actually did notice it too. So
Yeah. Okay, I'm glad that it
yeah.
that was like a weird thing. Would have been really easy for him to just have a pair of shears for
Or
cutting
just
paper
yeah.
or
Yeah.
like skipping that step. Anyways, I mean, also it kind of dulls things when you stab people with your scissors, but
Well, that's fair.
I guess you could oil things with blood. I don't know. Don't want to get too into the mechanics of that. But I mean, this is a hard movie to talk about costumes because everyone basically is in one outfit the entire time. I liked what they dressed Zoe in. I thought that it was nice that she was this kind of splash of red, worked really well. I liked her costuming, also very much made her feel like a woman on the move, that she is trying to get herself out of Chicago. She felt much more fashion forward than most of the men in their suits that felt a little bit more antiquated, a little bit more of a symbol of bygone days, which I thought was great. I also loved his comments about blue jeans the entire time, just like the bane of his existence. He's going to go kill Levi after this. I feel like, stopping the denim industry in its tracks. I really like that. I felt like the costumes were really great in this, and the costumes for the outfit were designed by Sophie O'Neill and Zach Posen. Zach really hasn't worked on a lot of projects. This is probably his biggest film. And Sophie has mostly worked as an assistant costume designer or a buyer on a lot of different projects, mostly based in the UK. But she also was the assistant costume designer on the film The King's Man. So I can thank her for putting Daniel Bruhl in that beautiful jacket. Love a good man in fur around his face. So thank you for that. Also, she was the assistant costume designer on Mamma Mia, Here We Go Again, which I added just for
Oh my
Nicole.
god, one of my favorite movies of all
I
time.
know. When I saw that she worked on that, I was like, this is kismet right
Honestly,
here.
also those costumes in that movie are insane.
They're
Every
so good.
single thing Lily James wears. So like shout out.
Yes. And she also did the costumes on Kingsman, The Golden Circle. Thank you for that as well, Sophie. Great costume work. Big fan of Pedro Pascal's costumes in that movie. So yeah, I was happy to see that it felt like this film very much elevated a lot of people on the crew side who had mostly been assistants or buyers or second ACs, and really gave them an opportunity to shine on this project. And I think it all worked well. It seems like everybody on this project was really committed to making a really compelling and very fun, twisty crime, murder, historical mob movie. And I think that it just worked so well. I truly enjoyed the outfit. And I was actually so disappointed because I saw that it did not get super good reviews at Berlinale.
Mm.
And I was kind of disappointed. But honestly, I've been really disappointed by a lot of things I've seen at film festivals here recently. So maybe
Yeah.
people were just burnt out by that point and the twists just didn't work for them, and maybe with
That's
fresh
fair.
eyes, they might enjoy it more. Because I
Yeah.
did. I thought this I don't know, maybe it's because 'cause I'm a Focus Features, fan. There's people who say that A24 films can do no wrong when they definitely have. And maybe
Mhm, mhm.
I'm compelled to love anything that opens with Focus Features.
We simply are Focus Features girlies.
We are. This should have
Um,
been, like, the Focus fans forum or something.
I love that, okay. Focus Features, if you want, like, a Focus Features specific podcast, feel
Hit us up.
free to hire us to run it. Um, we will rebrand. Um, I also do want to recognize real quick before we, outro out of here that we are recording this on Maggie's birthday, and it should be going up pretty soon after, so everybody should wish Maggie a very, very happy birthday.
Thank you.
And she's had a fantastic past year, and I can't wait to see what she's gonna achieve in the next year.
You flatter
Yeah,
me.
I'm very proud of her.
Thank you, thank you.
Um, well, thank you all so much for joining us in our 40th episode and our 2-year anniversary episode
Can't
about
believe
The
it.
Outfit, which is in theaters now. If you want to read our reviews of it, you can find my review at Wealth of Geeks. You can find Maggie's review at Collider.
Yes, and we would love to hear from you on social media after you watch the movie, and we wanna know what you think about The Outfit.
You can find us on social media at HGATM Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can find Maggie at Maggie of the Town, and you can find me over at Nicole Ackman 16.
And you can listen to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, the Airglue Media website, and of course, Audible. If you like what you hear, don't forget to leave us a rating over on Apple Podcast or on Podchaser or on the newly rolled out Spotify ratings tool that they have over there for podcasts. Every few episodes, we would love to be able to read your reviews, so be sure to leave us one if you would like to be featured one day.
We'll be back soon with another episode as we continue to look at period films from a history and film perspective.
You've been listening to Petticoats and Poppies.
History Girls at the Movie.
Okay, let me slurp down some Guinness. I just want to make sure that everyone knows that there is also a full moon on my birthday.
Incredible. Incredible.
Truly some crazy Pisces energy today.
I love that for you.
Yes.